Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 265. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm joined by author D.A. Murray to talk about Dominion Ascension, the first book in her new Dominion trilogy. The story takes place about 30 years in the future, in the aftermath of a devastating war that has reshaped society into a post-apocalyptic nation known as Dominion. The consequences of that conflict run deep. Cognitive decline, widespread infertility, and a dramatic shift in the balance of power. In this world, women now hold control. At the center of the story is Dani Matthews, an investigative reporter and the daughter of a high-ranking Dominion official. As Dani digs into the truth behind the government's propaganda, she uncovers unsettling secrets about Dominion, about the war, and about her own mother. In this episode, I'll chat with D.A. about her writing journey, the power dynamics between men and women, and what happens when those dynamics are flipped, and why the heart of the story isn't technology or politics, but human relationships, as well as a few other things. Coming up. D.A. Murray, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I thought what we could do today is talk about your new book, Dominion Ascension. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this story and what inspired you to write it.
Absolutely. Well, Dominion Ascension takes place about 30 years into the future of the U.S. There's been a great war. There's been a number of significant changes as a result of this war. Some of them have to do with the impact of fertility on the male, for males, as well as cognitive impairment as well. So there's a number of issues that have really flipped society upside down, so to speak, and women are in control. And as a result of this, there's a number of responses to this change in society that really is rather exciting in terms of how the heroine, Dani Matthews, navigates these changes and really tries to find ways to discover the truth behind what society has decided is what they want to propagate in the future. And it's all about her journey and her relationships and experiences along the way. Don't want to give away too much, but that's kind of it in essence.
Okay. What I'd like to do is start with a discussion about the world building. I want to get to Dani in a little bit, but let's set the scene. Let's start at the very beginning. What was the spark for you where you thought, okay, here is what I build this book around?
Mm-hmm. I think a large part of it was just the advancement of technology in society. I mean, that was really what I think was the spark. But I think also was just all of the changes that are happening outside of that, in terms of humanity, the importance of the decisions that are made today and the impact on the generations in the future, the perception of male and female roles in society and how that is, ever evolving. I think a lot of these issues were things that really did come to the forefront to me over the last few years. And it just felt as if overall there was a need for technology to catch up with humanity and not the other way around.
Mm,
And that was really what sat at kind of the base of all of this as I was writing.
interesting. Okay. So, as you started thinking about this world, a couple of questions. One, why 30 years in the future? Because that's far enough out that there can be significant changes, particularly at the rate at which technology is evolving. But it's
Right.
not so far out that we feel a disconnect
Right.
with
And that is
it.
intentionally why I wrote it 30 years out. I wanted it to be near future as opposed to something that's so far out. It's like, you almost can kind of play with it. But I really wanted people to think about, hey, this could really happen. And we're already planting seeds. And so that was really the purpose of keeping it near future.
Right, right. And
Mhm.
is there a challenge with writing a book that imagines technology sort of at the forefront of what's happening in the story? Is there a challenge with doing that and being outpaced by the reality of what we're seeing in technology?
I don't think it's as much of a challenge because there's so much, kind of foretelling, if you will, around what technology is going to be like in the future. And I think it becomes more of a question of how does that technology evolve given the status of where we are as humans? It's very common for, technology to take, several steps forward and then take several steps back just because of issues that, challenge it. And I think that's where I really wanted to go. It was less about, hey, is this really probable? Because I think people feel like it's probable. I don't think that's the issue. I think it's more around, what could this really do in terms of how it impacts me? How can it impact me if this was the way the world was today? And that's where I really wanted people to, plant the seed.
Mm. Well, and that's an interesting point that you make about technology taking steps forward and steps back.
Mhm,
And that sort of harkens back to what you said about technology catching up with humanity. So
mhm,
it seems like it's not just a case, particularly in your story, of technology running away from us,
mhm,
but it getting ahead, we rein it in, it moves ahead, we rein it in. It's
mhm.
sort of a stair step kind of advancement.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because keep in the middle, at the end of the day, we are developing it and training it and guiding it, and that's kind of always the, kind of the foundational piece of it. So we have the opportunity to do things like apply guardrails or decide how we want to pace, its evolution and so forth. And I think that's where the humanity piece of it comes in.
Right. Right. Stories like yours being sort of cautionary tales also. Let's not forget
Yeah.
to do
Mhm.
exactly that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So when you were building this world, I'm curious about the sort of rules and parameters and guidelines that you decided for society 30 years out, in particular in relation to gender,
Mm-hmm.
class, economics, that sort of thing. How did you go about deciding, I want this, I don't want this, this
Mm-hmm.
seems plausible, nope, that's not going to help my story move forward, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera?
Right. Well, I think when I was crafting the story, it was really important to me to highlight the the male female roles in society and and the power dynamics associated with that. Women have power, men do not. What are the natural extensions of that? Are those natural extensions things that would happen whether it was male or female? Does it not matter? Like those were kind of the things, the power dynamics were really important. And the sense of agency that, women have as a result of this power dynamic. So that was, to me, was really kind of baseline for me where everything needed to start. But I also felt that in the context, we're also basically talking about a human story. And I wanted to ground people in the relationship between mother, daughter, mother, our father and daughter, friend. So I thought it was important to bring a sense of humanity to the story. And so I wanted to really align the evolution of Dominion with the evolution of some of the relationships in the story. So those were the kinds of things that I thought were really important to bring forth. And I think in terms of the role that the technology plays, it was, I think it helped kind of set the stage for what was at least what people could start to imagine. I wouldn't say it's the star of the show, so to speak. I think the star of the show is really the human relationships. And I really wanted it to be, but obviously impacted by all the things that are happening around. So those were kind of the key things that really stuck out in my mind as I was thinking about the world. But I was also thinking about, this is a war. What does the world look like after a devastating war? What is, environmentally, what does it look like? What types of homes do people have? What types of, how would this, impact education? What are the decisions that are made maybe in haste because you've got to make a decision right away because there's nothing else, you've got to do something, right, versus taking your time writing a plan. And, you don't have time for that. The house is burning down. You got to figure out how to get out. And so there was almost kind of this sense of what are some of the things that were put in place immediately that maybe looking back may not have been ideal. So I just think that was a really interesting dynamic as it pertained to the environmental and some of the decisions that were made around that. And then I think ultimately, how do you get power, but more importantly, how do you retain it? Right. So those were all kind of the broader, issues that were going on in my mind too, as I was thinking about the characters and in the scenario. And then of course, keeping it exciting.
Right.
I like a good thriller.
Right. And what I think is interesting is you've got women in the power roles and the power classes in the story. And it sort of challenges the traditional idea of what a matriarchy would look like.
Yeah.
I mean, many stories you see a matriarchy where it's a kinder, gentler world that we've created. But your story challenges that idea.
Absolutely. Because keeping in mind, power is what changes the dynamic, right? And, these are the other reason why this is near future. I didn't mention this before, but this is really important. There are still individuals in this society who remember what it was like before the war, right? And now they're living in this completely different society. And so I think just being able to have that perspective also can fundamentally change how you choose to retain, or what you're willing to do to retain power.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about Dani, because she is the lens through which we see what is happening and we start to evaluate it or question it. So, what can you tell us about Dani?
Right. Well, there's a couple things. Like I said, it was important for me to write this story in first person point of view because I wanted the reader to see everything through Dani's eyes and really relate and understand her. And the key thing around Dani is that, she's a reporter. So she, and she's really evolved into a role like that because of certain things that happened in her childhood in relationship to her mother and father that have put her on a very determined course to seek the truth. And I think it's through this truth seeking that she chooses to find what is really behind, all of the narrative out there, right? The propaganda out there about dominion. And it's great that it sounds, like it sounds so empowering, and it sounds like, this is the right place to be. It's utopia almost, but the reality is that she's being brought in contact with certain information and resources that definitely do not support that. And so her quest to find the truth is a harrowing one, because it's not simple. It's not like you can just, talk to a couple people, get a perspective, go someplace, go online. You can't do any of that. She has to be physically in the game. And being physically in the game means she's going on a journey. And this journey, really does put her in touch with a number of experiences that bring clarity to a number of the questions that she has about what's really happening in Dominion. And I think also what's really important is, Dani's mother is a rather powerful figure in the Dominion infrastructure. And so here you are again, she's questioning these, the power of Dominion and the validity of what she's being told, but she knows that her mother is part of the Dominion engine. So how do you reconcile that piece of it, right? So she's struggling with that as well. And I think at the end of the day, it's really about, you got to make some decisions. You got to make decisions about, what does it mean to be a citizen of this country? What does it mean to be authentic and true to yourself, and what's important, for your own well-being, but also important for everyone else? The needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few. And also at the end of the day, how does Dani start to break out of this role of being her mother's daughter, a child in some respects, to a grown woman who's making these discoveries and these decisions on her own? So it's a really interesting kind of coming into self story, as well as coming into the truth about where she lives.
I think your book, like a number of sci-fi novels and dystopian stories, they give readers this opportunity to evaluate and question issues or problems that are happening in the world that we are actually living in. But it does it in a way that is not quite so close. It's not quite so familiar, so in your face. It allows you a little bit of distance, a little bit of, sort of a creative arm's length, if you will. And this story feels very similar in that regard. So I'm curious, when you were writing it, were there things that you wanted readers to wrestle with? Was there discomfort you wanted to make sure that they felt as they were reading that story? Something you wanted them to challenge about their way of thinking or the way they look at the world?
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, to your point about it being somewhat distant from the here and now, it was also intended that way because I wanted men to be able to read the story and not take it as a direct affront. And I think the way you do that is you make it about something that is plausible, but it isn't here yet, nor is there any proof that it ever will be here. So now everyone can kind of sit back and be comfortable in the conversation and not try to argue some kind of a political stance or social stance. It's just more of exploratory conversation. So that was important to me, that I didn't want it lynched. I didn't want a linchpin of everything that's happening today. And, it's almost becomes this, it just becomes this quagmire of, political and social, conversation that I think I wanted people to almost kind of take a step back from that and really think about the humanity of what's happening, the humanity, and what does that really mean? And so that was more of the vein in which I was thinking about this book. And the nice thing about it is, I've had the opportunity to attend a number of book club meetings where I've had people, ask questions and be part of conversations that have been really exciting. Like I'm seeing folks asking the right kinds of questions. I shouldn't say the right kinds of questions, but asking the types of questions that I had hoped they would ask, So that's been exciting to see that evolution and people wanting to continue talking about it in terms of their relationships, in terms of their work, in terms of what they should really be paying more attention to, because that's the other thing I think the story does point to, is the importance of taking responsibility for taking a look beneath the hood. Don't just trust what's put in front of you, and often what's just put in front of you, you're not getting the full picture. You've got to look underneath the hood. You've got to question everything, especially now. You've got to question everything. So I think the need to be curious is something that I think as humans, need to continue to build that muscle and exercise that whenever possible. I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting is that I think, like with anything that happens, things happen in small bits and pieces as opposed to it happening all of a sudden. And I think that that's a really interesting dynamic when you look at things like technology or surveillance, or, it's very easy to accept restrictions when they seem so, just so small. Oh, that's not a big deal. But then they take more and they take more. And then one day you look back and the impact is much more significant than you ever thought. So that goes back to that whole idea that you really got to ask questions and take a look at what's going on around you. And a small loss can easily become a big one later on. So
Yeah, that's a very good point.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The reactions and the feedback that you've been getting from people, as you said, it's been exciting. You've been encouraged by the questions that people have been asking. Has anything surprised you? Has anybody come back to you with a comment or a question that sort of caught you off guard and you thought, oh, well, okay, that's good. I hadn't even thought of that. Or,
Yeah. One of the questions I got was, you focused on male and female power dynamics, et cetera, this future society. Why isn't there any real focus on race? I'm a Black female. There would just, be this natural, like, why isn't that there? And, I have to tell you, these are really robust topics. And I think that to do a topic like power and legacy and, male female social dynamics within this completely different society, I think you have to choose where you really need to land your feet. And so I really felt like that to me was a topic that is so robust in and of itself. There was no way could do the story justice by, kind of conflating the two and trying to bring forth a story that might in some way, really, kind of dilute what I was trying to bring forth about the power dynamics. So trust me, it's not something that I haven't thought about, but I think you have to be very intentional about where you really want to bring the reader. And that was not in the forefront of my mind with this particular story.
Interesting. Okay.
Oh, the one thing I did want to mention that I get this question a lot. when I was writing the book, one of the things that people often mention is there's a lot of description and they can see things so clearly. And it feels like it was written for, like for film or something, like the big screen. When I was writing Dominion, that's exactly what it was in my head. I was writing it with the intention of it eventually being on film. So that was something else. It's very unique about the book. It's descriptive and it really does bring you into the story because, just of the places and what it smells like, what things taste like, all of those things that are so critical to building that whole sensory experience for you. So
right, yeah, no, that definitely makes the world building richer when all that stuff goes in, right? It really
absolutely.
hooks the reader. Well, what are your plans then for the rest of the trilogy? And have you started writing book
Oh, of course,
two?
yeah. Absolutely. Well, I think one of the things that's fairly clear from reading the first story, Dominion Ascension, is that it is not an ideal society. There are many, many efforts to retain power, but there are many efforts to take that power away. So the next book is called Dominion Anarchy. And as the title implies, it's all about the efforts to retain control and the efforts to take that control away.
Right. So a little bit of action, a little bit of tension should be a nice, quiet, easy, gentle read. Yes.
I wish I could say it was a quiet, gentle read. I honestly, I'm finding myself completely usurped by it. And it's a very action driven story for obvious reasons. And while the first book, Dominion Ascension, was written in first person, the second book is I'm actually writing it in third person multiple view because it's a broader, sweeping story that requires bringing the reader into a number of different experiences that can't really be done justice by just one point of view. So it's going to be it's pretty dynamic that way.
Right. And then do you have plans for book three? Do you know how
Absolutely, yes.
you know how it all ends?
Yeah, I know. Now, I like to say that book three, I have the creative license to make some changes. But yeah, I have a fairly darn good idea. I've written a rough draft of three and a very detailed draft of two, and writing the scenes of two right now. So
Okay. Okay. But you reserve the right to change your mind down the
absolutely.
road if the characters start doing crazy things and not following the outline.
Well, I think that the wonderful thing I think about, the human race is that we can look back historically and see just the cyclical nature of, human decision and the impact of that. And to tell you the truth, I don't see that being something that is going to be significantly different. How it may happen will be different, but the impact of that isn't going to be different. So, I see myself making some changes, but I think the fundamentals will still remain intact.
Yeah. Yeah. How long did it take you to write the first book?
Oh my God. Um, hmm, okay. Well, from first draft to maybe eighth draft, maybe about 3 years,
Yeah.
you know. Because I'm also, I work full time during the day, so I have to write at night or work on the weekends, that kind of thing. And then that doesn't even include the multiple, edits that had to happen with my editor, that whole process was probably almost a year, like just going through all of the different, the entire book over and over, reading it over and over again. I mean, I've read my book so many times, I can't read it anymore. I just can't. It's like I'm trying. There's certain things I've kind of forgotten, but I refuse to go in the book and look for it. What's the name of that character? I don't know. I'm not going to look. I don't care. I'll figure it out. It'll pop in my head someday, but I just can't read it again.
Yeah. No, I understand. How is the experience different with book 2? Because I imagine there is some pressure to do it quicker.
Oh my God.
Right?
Yes. Oh my God.
And you're a little bit more hamstrung because you've already written book 1. So you can't just now do whatever you want. You have to sort of stick to what you've committed to already. So are you enjoying it as much as the first time out, or is it just a different experience entirely?
I mean, I enjoy writing in general. So the joy of writing, that hasn't gone away. Yeah, there's a lot of pressure to produce book number 2 because after you read book number 1, you immediately want to know what happens next. And, so I get that question constantly. When is book number 2 coming out? I'm like, just give me a moment. And I wish I was one of those people who had written a 3,000 or 300,000, page manuscript, and I could just split it up and just
right.
I didn't do that, and I don't have the benefit now of, COVID, where I was basically just stuck in the house. I had, I wasn't going anywhere except just working and writing. I don't have that. And so that's a little bit different. I mean, a lot different. And and the thing with this book, the first book is really personal, really personal. The second book is just to write the scenes exhausts me because there's a lot of research that goes into it. And then just to write it, and then it can be overpowering at times where I just have to take a moment because this was just this scene was just exhausting. So, I have those moments. So I'm desperately seeking opportunity for some of the more softer, less, energy intensive, intense types of scenes. So, but book 2 is definitely a harder write for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And if your path follows paths of other writers I've interviewed who have written trilogies, the third book will present its own challenges because you have to tie everything up, wrap up all those loose ends, and say goodbye to. So it's an emotional roller coaster unto itself. So you have that to look forward to.
Yeah, I think so. But I'll tell you, I'm looking forward to it because I just have stacks of stories and I want to tell, but the problem is I'm in a trilogy.
Right.
And I only got time to write one thing. I can't write multiple things right now. So that's the other thing. I'm excited to get to the end because, I'm really excited about some of the other stuff that I've been, I've drafted or things I've been thinking about that I want to write about, but I just don't have time to do it.
Yeah. I was going to ask if you have other goals other than finishing this trilogy. Do you have other goals? Are there other genres you want to tackle or types of stories you want to write? Are there other things you want to do?
Yeah. I really would love to do a thriller. I mean, I put elements of that in my book, but something really, exciting around that has nothing to do with, dystopian fiction. But I'm also really interested in doing some romance would be cool. I used to write a lot of poetry in college, and I did a lot of erotic poems and things of that nature. So that's been kind of cool. So I've been kind of thinking about doing something along those lines, but love stories, not the typical love stories, things that are just kind of a little out there in terms of, not all love stories end up, going off into the wild blue yonder or in the sunset. But
Right, right, right.
thought about that. So, thrillers, love stories, and just things like that.
Very exciting. Okay. So while people await book two and
Yeah.
all these other books they have to look forward to, if they want to learn more about you and Dominion Ascension
Mhm.
and other things that you have going on, where can they go to find you and that information?
So you can go to my author site at damurrayofficial.com. And you can find there, I got my blog on there. You can learn about the characters, which is really exciting. I also have a book club kit, and you can download that for your book club. And it's got a glossary, it's got games, cocktail menu, food menu. It's got a lot of really fun things in there that you can use for your book club, or even just your personal enjoyment. If you just want to have, enjoy a cocktail and read the book, that's great too. Nothing wrong with that. But yeah, so I get all my updates, put all my updates on the site and so forth. I also have pretty active on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, so you can always check out a lot of the content around the book and what's up and coming. Also, on my social sites, I also do I do interviews with folks. I just asking them what their favorite book is and why they're reading what they're reading. So that's another thing I really enjoy doing, is just understanding people's love for reading. And so you can check that out too if you're looking for something new and exciting and you want to see what folks are reading. That's a great place to go at D.A. Murray Official. It's all D.A. Murray Official.
Excellent. Well, and if people want to pick up a copy of Dominion Ascension, where can
Yeah.
they go to buy it?
You can buy it at bookshop.org, which supports independent bookstores, which I love. Amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com, walmart.com. So you can buy it just any of those places. So,
Wonderful.
and growing.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, DA, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. I want to wish you luck with Dominion Ascension and book two, which you're working on. We'll eagerly await that one. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.